What if your dreams weren't just dreams? What if the thing you ran from didn't stay behind? Have you ever woken up and felt like something else came back with you? Tonight, we begin a story that drifts between realities. A story that doesn't end when you open your eyes. This is, I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. You're listening to EchoVerse Whispers, where sleep is never silent, and dreams echo louder than screams. So, put on your headphones, turn the lights low, and ask yourself one last question: are you sure you're the only one who woke up? I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. I used to believe that nightmares ended when you woke up, that the cold, sweat, and racing heart were the worst of it, but what happened to me proved that some dreams clawed their way through the veil and dragged parts of themselves back with you. It started 3 nights ago when I fell asleep during a power outage in my apartment. The whole building drowned in darkness except for the faint red flicker of the exit sign down the hall that pulsed like a dying heart. And as soon as I closed my eyes, I was standing barefoot in an endless field of dry, whispering grass that reached my waist and hissed as though breathing. The sky overhead roiled with stars that weren't fixed but slowly spun in impossible formations like they were watching, adjusting, waiting. And somewhere far off, I heard a sound like wet cloth being ripped apart, mixed with distant breathing, something massive and ancient inhaling me into its awareness. I tried to walk, but the ground beneath the grass wasn't solid. It gave slightly, like skin stretched over bone, and with each step, I felt the faintest shudder beneath me, as though something was responding to my movement. After what felt like hours, I reached a structure rising out of the ground. A tower of doors stacked one on top of the other like a twisted spinal column reaching up to the shifting constellations. Each door different, some rotting wood with rusted knobs, some metallic and humming faintly, some impossibly narrow or wide or shaped like crooked mouths, and behind each door I could hear something shifting, pacing, waiting. I don't know why, but I touched the third one from the bottom, and the instant my fingers brushed it open, I was sucked through like falling into a tunnel of smoke and screams, emerging into a memory that wasn't mine. A dim hospital hallway lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Stretchers lining the walls with indistinct shapes writhing under blood-stained sheets. No nurses, no doctors. Just a rhythmic slamming sound at the far end and a child's voice singing ring around the rosy but slower, slurred, each note dragging like it was being pulled from a throat full of sand. I tried to back away, but the hallway elongated, stretched, twisted, and from the doors lining it came eyes. Just eyes floating in the air, wide and milky, and full of recognition. And I realized they weren't watching me, they were remembering me. And somehow I remembered them too, even though I'd never seen this place. I ran, turned, dove through another door, and this time I was in my own apartment again, but something was wrong. The lights were all on though, I'd left them off. The TV was playing static at full volume. And on the screen was a silhouette pacing back and forth, and when I approached, it stopped and pointed at me. Then the screen cracked from the inside and a finger pushed through, long and pale and twitching with wet nails clicking on the glass like teeth. I screamed myself awake, or thought I did. But I was still in the dream. Layers within layers, and now the sky was gone, replaced with a churning black ceiling covered in writing that bled. Language I couldn't read but somehow understood. You took it with you, and when I finally did wake up, sitting bolt upright in bed with my throat sore from screaming and my hands shaking, my apartment was normal again, almost, because near The closet door were muddy footprints, small, like a child's butt, ending in long, thin drags, as if whatever made them had been pulled away or had crawled back in. And since then, every night I return, whether I want to or not, each dream starting where the last ended, as if I'm moving through levels of something that's not entirely mine. And the worst part is that now I see signs during the day too. A glimpse of that door-shaped tower in the reflection of the toaster. A brief moment where my shadow doesn't move with me. The whispering of grass from beneath the floorboards. And last night, when I turned on the hallway light, it flickered in that same heartbeat rhythm I saw in the dream. And I swear just before it went out, I saw a second me, standing still at the far end of the hallway with a grin too wide in eyes that blinked sideways. And I knew I hadn't escaped anything. I'd just brought it home. I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back the second night began before I even realized I had fallen asleep. One moment I was lying in bed with my eyes half closed, the distant hum of my refrigerator anchoring me to reality. And the next I was standing in front of my own apartment building. But it wasn't right. The bricks were too smooth, like they'd been molded from wax. The windows were hollow and gaping. And the sky above was a dead gray dome with no stars. No clouds, no movement, only a pressure like the sky itself was leaning down on everything. Below, I tried to turn back, but my feet were rooted in place. My bare soles stuck to the asphalt like it had grown fingers and was holding me there. I heard my own name whispered from behind me, but when I turned, there was only static in the air. A fuzzing sound like detuned radios, and then suddenly, the door to the building opened on its own, revealing a staircase that descended instead of climbed, going impossibly deep like it pierced the earth's crust. Each step creaked under my weight, and with each level the temperature dropped until I could see my breath curling in front of me even though I wasn't breathing. Not really, because I realized my chest wasn't rising and falling anymore. Something else was keeping me moving. Something beneath my skin that had taken over the rhythm. At the bottom of the staircase I found a corridor flooded ankle-deep with cold, dark water and dozens of floating objects I recognized. My toothbrush, the notebook I lost last year, an old birthday card from my mother, all bobbing silently in place, as if they were watching me, with invisible eyes. I waded through, the water thickening as I moved until it felt more like blood than liquid, and the hallway ended at a mirror, not a door. Just a massive full-body mirror that shimmered with oily light, and my reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was the version of me I saw at the end of the hallway the night before, the grin too wide, the eyes blinking sideways, and it moved even when I stood still, tilting its head, lifting one hand to point behind me, and when I turned around I saw a door where the wall had been. A door with a symbol etched into it that pulsed like a heartbeat. I didn't want to open it. Everything in me screamed not to. But my hand moved on its own, and the moment the door creaked open, I was inside a room with no walls, no floor, just infinite black space, and a single red swing set in the center, swaying though there was no wind, and on it sat a child with no face. Just smooth skin where features should be, humming the same broken version of Ring Around the Rosie. Each note wrong and stretched like it had been recorded underwater, and the child slowly turned toward me and pointed to the space behind me again. I turned against every instinct I had done, saw a version of my apartment torn in half. The top floating above the bottom, like a dollhouse ripped apart. Furniture suspended mid-air, and walking between the frozen pieces of my life, was a tall, thin figure in a black suit stitched from spider legs, its arms dragging behind it like wet ropes, and when it turned to face me, it had my face but without skin, only muscle and teeth, smiling in a way that screamed. And then I was falling, endlessly, down through memories I didn't recognize. Flashes of strange rituals in candlelit rooms, masked people holding open doors to tunnels made of flesh. And I kept hearing the same sentence in dozens of overlapping voices. You opened it, you opened it, you opened it. Until finally I landed hard in my own bed. Awaker, so I thought, until I realized I couldn't move, couldn't speak, and from the corner of my vision I saw the figure standing over me. Head tilted, watching, waiting, and then it leaned. Dallin whispered something I can't remember but have been hearing ever since, in every silence, in every shadow. Even now as I write this I feel it just beyond the edges of the screen. Smiling that terrible smile and waiting for me to fall asleep again. Because I know now it's not a dream I'm falling into, it's a place. A real place. And it remembers me, and worse, I think it loves me. I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. The third night began with a silence so perfect it felt violent. Not the kind of silence that soothes but one that swallows, erases, and replaces everything with the weight of something listening. I didn't fall asleep the normal way. There was no drifting, no fluttering of thoughts, no blur into unconsciousness. Instead I blinked, and I was sitting on a long, narrow train with no windows. The seats were velvet red and pulsing slightly beneath my legs as if alive. And all the other passengers were mannequins with shattered porcelain faces. Their eyes replaced with rotating gears clicking softly in unison. The train moved forward with a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. But slightly off, like it was syncing itself to me, adapting, preparing. Outside, the black walls of the train flickered with images, not reflections but moving pictures of my life, moments I hadn't remembered in why. Blinked after I did, moved just slightly slower, and when I smiled it didn't. It just stared back with that empty expression, as if unsure what face to wear. I ran to my window and saw the street below was frozen. The people unmoving, the trees stiff as statues, and the sky flickered like an old screen, repeating the same cloud patterns over and over again. And then, as if to confirm my worst fear, my phone buzzed once with a notification that simply read, "Fifth entry logged," with no app, no sender, no history. And ever since then I've felt something inside me shifting. Not physically but fundamentally, like certain memories don't belong to me anymore. Or certain thoughts come in voices that aren't mine. And worst of all, I think the dream didn't just follow me back, it's rebuilding itself here, inside this version of reality. Inserting doors where they never were, writing new rules under the floorboards, and waiting patiently for the next time I close my eyes. Because now I know I'm not escaping anything. I'm becoming part of it. I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back. The sixth night didn't wait for me to fall asleep, began the moment I blinked too long while washing my hands. The instant of darkness behind my eyelids stretching and stretching until the sound of the faucet was replaced by a deep mechanical hum, and when I opened my eyes, I was standing in the middle of a long, rusted bridge suspended in the middle of a dead ocean, the water beneath me motionless and black as ink with thousands of pale hands just beneath the surface, reaching upward, their fingers twitching in slow motion like they were dreaming of. Grabbing the sky was a swirling bruise of violet and green clouds, and two moons stared down with open eyes. Not celestial but living, watching everything I did with blinking patience. I took a step forward and the bridge groaned beneath me, bleeding from its joints as though it had veins and capillaries. And ahead I saw figures walking slowly toward me, identical versions of myself, each one aged differently, one covered in rot and fungus, another wearing a hospital gown and dragging an IV stand filled with black fluid, another completely charred and still smoking. And they all whispered the same thing as they passed: "You're late, you shouldn't be here, you opened it too wide, it remembers your name now." And I tried not to listen, but their words slithered into my thoughts like leeches, rewriting my memories as I walked past them. I forgot my own middle name, my first kiss, the face of someone I once loved, replaced instead with images of staircases that descended forever and doorways made of screaming mouths. I finally reached the center of the bridge, where a hole yawned open like a well and the air around it buzzed like an insect nest. I was pulled down into it not by gravity but by command. Like it had decided I belonged inside and I was helpless to resist. I landed on a floor that writhed beneath me, a living surface covered in twitching hair and weeping eyes. And before me stood the child again, but now its body had grown, stretched into a shape too tall and thin, its joints bent the wrong way, and it wore a crown of keys all jingling softly in rhythm with my heartbeat. It pointed to a row of doors, floating mid-air, rotating slowly, each one identical except for a single blinking eye carved into the wood. The child raised one hand, and all the doors swung open at once, revealing scenes. I cannot explain my own corpse being applauded by a crowd of featureless people. A version of myself carving symbols into the moon's surface with a screaming knife, a darkened classroom filled with mannequins, slowly mouthing the word home in unison. And one door showed my apartment, empty, still, clean, but with a figure sitting in my bed wearing my clothes and staring at the wall. Waiting. The child motioned toward that one, and the moment I stepped through, I felt my skin tighten, my breath thin, and my thoughts slow as though I were moving through syrup. Because the world I entered looked perfect, but felt wrong. The details were too precise. Like a copy made by someone who had studied my life, but never lived it. Every item in my apartment was positioned exactly how I remembered, but none of it smelled right, none of it felt worn or touched. And as I stepped into the bedroom, I saw the figure sitting on the bed slowly turn to face me. And it was me, again, but grinning so wide, the skin cracked at the edges. Its eyes empty, sockets filled with spiraling galaxies. It said in my voice, "You left the gate open," and then leaped at me with fingers that stretched across the room, wrapping around my throat as I screamed myself awake, or so I thought. Because when I sat up in my real bed, the world remained silent and frozen again. Every object perfectly still, the air humming with low frequencies I couldn't trace. And in the corner of my room stood the tall, black-suited figure from the first night. Its arms now splitting into dozens of tendrils, each tipped with an open, blinking eye. It didn't move, it just stared. And on the wall beside it was a new door, one that hadn't been there yesterday. And when I looked away for a moment, it disappeared again, replaced by a patch of wall that looked fresher than the rest, like it had been repaired recently. That morning when I left for work, every person I passed on the street blinked out of sync, their heads twitching slightly, as though buffering. And on the subway, every ad had been replaced by images of my own face slowly dissolving into static, and no one reacted, not even when I screamed. Because now I understand, the dream isn't waiting for night anymore, it's bleeding into the day. slowly, deliberately, syncing itself with my heartbeat, my breath, my presence. And worse than all of it, is the creeping certainty, that when I return to sleep again, the dream will be waiting, smiling, and every version of me, I've left behind. There will be closer to the surface, ready to trade places without asking. I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back. The seventh night came without warning. A moment between thoughts, while I sat staring at the television. The screen playing a channel I hadn't turned on, static at first. But beneath it was the faint shape of something moving, no sound, no color, just the outline of a door slowly opening, and the instant it opened fully, I was already inside. Dropped into a vast, endless field of mirrors floating in midair. Like glass islands, suspended above a sky made of screaming mouths. Every mirror showed me a different version of myself, but all of them were suffering, writhing, dying, or watching with smiles carved into their faces. I stepped onto the nearest pane and it held my weight like solid ground, but with every step I took the reflection beneath me distorted, showing me younger, older, stitched together with wires, half dissolved in acid. Or growing long roots that disappeared into darkness, and behind me, from some far place, I heard laughter, the child's voice again, only deeper now. Heavier, laced with static and hunger, it echoed across the mirror field, like it lived inside the glass. And then the sky pulsed and every mirror beneath me cracked slightly in unison. Each one bleeding black smoke that rose into the air and formed new shapes. Doors, spiraling keys, crawling hands with too many fingers. I ran, but the field was infinite. The mirrors rising and falling like waves. And then I reached the center. An enormous black mirror with no reflection at all. Only a perfect void in its surface, and the moment I stepped onto it, I fell not downward but inward, as though my thoughts were collapsing, and I landed in a version of my childhood bedroom, where everything was made of paper. The walls, the furniture, even the light. All thin and trembling with every breath I took. And I was not alone. In the corner sat the tall man in the suit. His eyes stitched shut now, but his grin wider than ever, and beside him stood the child. Wearing a crown of mirror shards and holding a long silver needle. It whispered, "It's time for the threading," and before I could move, I was bound to the paper floor, and the needle began sewing new thoughts into my mind, memories I never lived. People I never met, places that don't exist but now feel familiar, a lighthouse in a desert of bones, a funeral held at the bottom of the ocean, a house that screams when you knock. And each stitch pulled something out of me in return: my birthday, the name of my first pet, the sound of my mother's laugh, replaced with silence and dust, until I didn't know if I was still me, or just a shape made from someone else's dream. And when the threading stopped, I was released, alone, standing in front of a carousel spinning in reverse. The music box melody distorted and backwards, and the horses were all versions of me. Impaled through the mouth with iron poles, spinning, twitching, grinning. And on one of them sat the child, now wearing my skin again, holding a mirror in one hand and pointing at me with the other. And when I looked into the mirror, I saw nothing, no reflection at all, just darkness and whispering. And then the dream peeled away like burning film, layer by layer, until I was standing in my apartment again. But it was quiet, too quiet. And all the mirrors had been removed. Even the one in the bathroom. Just empty hooks and smears where they used to be. And I knew it wasn't me who had taken them down, but something inside the dream now shaping the waking world around it. I went to check my phone, and there was a new folder in my gallery called Seeing, filled with photos of me sleeping from angles I couldn't have taken, in places I'd never slept. And the last one was dated tomorrow, showing me curled up in a dark room, eyes open, and staring directly at the camera with a grin I've never made in my life. And now I know the dream is preparing. Documenting, rewriting, one piece at a time, and tonight, if it can still be called night, I don't think I'll be the only one sleeping in my skin. I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back. The eighth night arrived, not like a descent into sleep, but more like an invitation written directly into my bones. My limbs growing heavier as the hours passed, not from exhaustion but as if something deep within the marrow had been activated, summoned, and when I could no longer resist, and my eyes closed for just one breath, the world shattered again and I was back in that familiar nowhere. Only now I was in a forest made of veins and nerves, stretched taut into tree-like structures, pulsing and twitching with each step I took. And the sky above was no longer a sky but an endless eye, rotating slowly, its pupil dilating and contracting in sync with my breath, watching not like a god but like a parasite that had made me its host. I walked down a narrow path of teeth, their roots twisting beneath the fleshy soil. And from the treetops hung mirrors by strands of hair, each swaying in an invisible wind, each one capturing flickers of movement that weren't mine. Shadows of other versions of me stalking just outside my peripheral vision, some tall and thin, some hunched and crawling, some eyeless, but grinning like they knew something I didn't. And with each step, the air grew thicker, like wading through forgotten memories, slowly turning to rot. I reached a clearing, where a carousel turned slowly in the center of a pit filled with ink, its music box tune warping in and out of tune. And seated on each painted horse was a child-shaped figure, each one wearing a mask of my face at different ages, some smiling, some crying, one with its mouth sewn shut. And at the center stood the original, the child that had followed me from the first dream, now taller, now wearing a robe stitched from strips of my old bedsheets, photos, and shredded journal pages, its eyes replaced with keys, spinning slowly, like clock hands, and it spoke without sound, the words slamming directly into my mind. "We are almost finished carving you," it said, and suddenly I was no longer standing, I was lying down, strapped to a table made of my own ribs, hovering in midair. And above me circled a halo of old televisions, showing loops of me committing acts I had never done, feeding a creature beneath my bed, pulling strangers into doorways and locking them inside, carving names into my own tongue, and from somewhere close I heard weeping, not mine, but familiar, echoing through the space until I turned my head and saw my parents seated on pews made of stone, their eyes gone, their mouths sewn shut with red string, rocking back and forth as they held hands with other people I once loved, all expressionless, all mouthing the same silent plea, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." But it was too late, because I understood now, the dream wasn't built by me, I was built by the dream. I was a shape it had chosen, sculpted through repetition and fear. And every night was just another ritual to shape me into what it needed me to become. Then a bell rang, one single toll that cracked the entire world like glass, and I fell again. This time, through memories stitched together with screams. Flashes of me watching myself sleep, versions of me whispering secrets into my own ear, a timeline folding in on itself, like origami set on fire, until I landed in a theater made of wax, where mannequins clapped slowly as I stumbled onto a stage lit by moonlight that dripped down like blood. And above the stage was a banner that read, "Welcome home, dreamer." And the audience all turned to face me, their eyes unblinking, their mouths frozen in anticipation. And I realized I was about to perform something I didn't know I'd written, a script the dream had burned into my bones. I opened my mouth to speak, and instead of words came the sound of my own alarm clock, shrill and distant, and then everything melted. And I sat upright in bed, shaking, my sheets soaked, my window open even though I had locked it. And written in condensation on the wall across from my bed were the words, "Tonight you sleepwalk." And now I don't know if I dreamt that part or if the dream dreamt it for me, because when I checked my hallway security camera footage, it showed me getting up at 3:11 a.m., unlocking the front door, and stepping out into the hallway, but I have no memory of leaving, and worse, the figure that left didn't move like me, didn't walk like me. It smiled at the camera just before disappearing into the dark, and my bed stayed empty until sunrise. I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. The ninth night began with a whisper from behind my reflection, not from the mirror itself, but from within it, as though the version of me that had stayed behind in earlier dreams had finally found its voice and now wanted to make itself known. And as I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in my hand, the reflection blinked before I did, then grinned slowly as cracks spidered across the glass, not from the surface but from behind. And when the final fracture reached the center, the entire mirror dissolved into black liquid and I was pulled through without moving, my body collapsing to the floor, while my mind was stretched into that impossible in-between, where the air smells like forgotten childhood dreams and every shadow breathes. I was standing in a hallway that never ended, doors on each side made of stitched skin, numbered in a language I could now understand, despite never learning it. Symbols that translated into memories I hadn't lived yet. And when I reached for the nearest doorknob, it whispered my name in my mother's voice, but when I opened it I found myself inside my own skull, watching myself sleep from within, trapped in the folds of my own dreaming mind, like a prisoner lost in his own diary. And within the space between brain and bone, something was crawling along, root-like creature made of my regrets, burrowing deeper with every heartbeat, whispering lullabies made of all the voices I'd forgotten, teachers, strangers, old friends, each syllable opening a door inside me I'd sealed long ago. And then I dropped again, through the optic nerve into another world where the sky was made of fingernails and the stars blinked like open wounds, and floating there was the carousel again. Only now the horses were skeletal copies of people I'd known who had died, each turning slowly while the music played backward in a child's giggle. And at the center was the child wearing my stolen skin, peeling it back like wrapping paper to reveal a glistening mass of eyes and mouths that all began chanting, "Not yet. Not yet. Not yet." And with each repetition, I felt something in the waking world tighten, like a thread pulling taut inside my chest. And then I was in a house that looked exactly like mine but wrong, slightly larger, walls leaning in too close, all the pictures replaced with scenes from the nightmares. And I saw myself in the kitchen, cooking something that was very much alive, its face weeping and smiling at the same time. And my dream self turned to me and said, "If I eat it, you wake up. If you eat it, you stay." And then both versions of me laughed as the scene disintegrated, pulling me into a train station beneath the ocean, tracks running out into blackness. The announcement board reading final form boarding, and standing in the center of the platform was the tall man again, holding a paper heart that beat like real flesh, extending it toward me like an offering or a command. And behind him, hundreds of versions of me stood in a long line, some holding mirrors, others holding knives, one dressed as a priest with no face. All watching, waiting for me to choose, and when I refused, the platform cracked and I fell into a tunnel of spiraling voices that sounded like they belonged to people who never existed. Until I landed in my own bedroom once again, only this time I was watching myself sleep from the corner, unable to move. And when morning came, I didn't wake up in bed, I woke up on the roof of my apartment, barefoot and shivering, with the word threshold carved into my forearm, and no blood. Just black ink seeping from the wound like the dreams had finally begun leaking into the waking world. And when I looked down at the street below, the people walking by all had my face, all smiling that impossible dream smile, and none of them cast shadows. I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. The 10th night felt like an ambush, not a slow drift into unconsciousness, but a violent snapping of reality, as though sleep had been weaponized against me and I was caught in the crosshairs of a thing older than dreaming. Older than me, older than the sky itself, because the moment my head touched the pillow, I didn't fall into darkness, I fell into white. An endless sterile void humming like an overlit hospital corridor with no walls, no shadows, and no place to hide, just me standing on an invisible floor, with the sound of breathing coming from beneath it. Thousands of synchronized inhales and exhales, vibrating up through my feet. And suddenly, rows of tall, sharp metal cabinets emerged from the void. Like grave markers, each drawer labeled with a date I hadn't lived yet, and when I opened the nearest one, it contained my own corpse, mouth open in a silent scream, skin etched with the same looping nightmare sigils I'd seen in the hallway from the earlier dream. And as I turned away, every drawer in the cabinet slammed open at once, revealing hundreds of me, each more decayed than the last, like a timeline decomposing out of order. And from behind me came the soft sound of clapping, slow and deliberate. And when I turned, I saw the audience again, the mannequins, but now they had mouths. And those mouths were bleeding, and they were all chanting in sync. It's almost time. It's almost time. As the void trembled and fractured like an egg, cracking from the inside, and through those cracks, poured memories I never made. I saw myself eating soil under the floorboards, whispering apologies to the worms. I saw myself whispering to someone who wore my skin backwards, feeding it secrets through my teeth. I saw my mother turning to ash in my arms while she sang me lullabies backwards, and all of it slammed into me like a wave of static. And when it passed, I was in a labyrinth made entirely of doors, some made of mirrors, some of bone, others of water that screamed when touched, and each door opened to the same room, my childhood bedroom, frozen in time but wrong. Like it had been rebuilt by someone who had only heard rumors of what it looked like, and in the bed lay a version of me, staring at the ceiling, eyes open, mouth muttering the phrase, "The shape beneath the dream is awake," over and over again. And I watched as the closet door creaked open, and something slithered out, a tall, trembling figure composed of all the shadows I'd ever seen under beds or behind curtains. Its body stitched together from my fears, its eyes dozens of tiny versions of my own blinking out of sync. And it didn't look at the boy in the bed, it looked straight at me, like it knew I didn't belong here, like I was the intruder, and it pointed a finger at me and whispered, "You shouldn't have escaped." And suddenly, I was being dragged backward through the dream. Through doorways made of old regrets, and down hallways paved with versions of myself, frozen mid-scream. And when I landed, I was back in the mirror world. Only this time, I wasn't looking at a reflection. I was the reflection, trapped on the other side, while the thing in my place smiled at me from the real world, brushing its teeth, blinking just out of rhythm. And I pounded on the glass with hands I couldn't feel, screaming without a voice, and just before I woke up, I saw it wink at me, and mouth the words, "You're not the dreamer anymore," and I shot up in bed, gasping. But everything around me was reversed. The posters flipped, the clock ticking counterclockwise, and the photo of me on the wall was smiling, even though I remembered taking that photo while crying. And when I tried to leave the room, the door handle bit me, drawing blood that wasn't red but black. Thick, and warm, and pulsing like it was still alive. And I realized then that the dream hadn't followed me back this time, my head never left it. I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. The 11th night began before I closed my eyes. Starting not with sleep, but with silence. A silence so total it swallowed the sound of my heartbeat, and turned every breath into a trespass, and, as the world around me hushed like a theater before a tragedy, I realized that the shadows in my room were no longer cast by the moonlight but shaped by intention, moving ever so slightly even when nothing else did, and the air tasted like copper and soil, like something freshly unearthed. And I knew that I wasn't alone, not in the room, not in the house, not even in my own skin, because something was watching me from inside. And when I finally surrendered to sleep, it wasn't descent but possession. Like my consciousness was shoved aside to make room for something older, something hungry, and I opened my eyes to find myself in a city that was perfectly still, buildings suspended mid-collapse, cars frozen mid-crash, people caught mid-scream but unmoving. A world paused at the moment of annihilation, with a sky made of ink, and stars that wept, instead of shining. And floating above it all was the nightmare wearing my body. Its limbs too long, smile too wide, eyes endless holes filled with stars I didn't recognize, and it whispered in 1,000 voices, "Look what I've done with your fear." And with one sweeping gesture, the world rewound in reverse. The chaos rebuilding itself into a twisted mirror of everything I knew my childhood. Home perched on top of a tower of vertebrae, my school rebuilt from broken glass, my friends walking backward through time with mouths sewn shut, and tears falling upward. And I walked through this parody of my life, as the nightmare narrated each step, laughing softly with every wrong turn I recognized. And when I tried to speak, I found my tongue tied in knots. Literal knots made of old shoelaces and umbilical cords. And I had to chew through it just to scream. But the scream only echoed back in a child's voice saying, "You promised you'd stay." And suddenly, I was in a room filled with clocks, none of them ticking, all of them watching. And from each one, a thread extended into my chest. And when they all began to spin at once, I felt time unravel inside me like a spider pulling silk from my bones. And then I saw the well again, the same one from my earliest dreams, only now it spoke, and it spoke in my voice, but deeper, slower, like it had drowned and learned to breathe water, and it told me to jump, told me I'd been circling it my whole life. And when I did, I fell not down but inward, past memories I'd buried, lies I'd told myself, and desires I'd denied, until I landed in a theater with an audience of corpses. Each one clapping politely as a stage curtain rose to reveal me tied to a chair. eyes pried open, watching all 15 nights play out on loop as the real me screamed behind the screen. And then came the sound, the impossible sound of all the dreams I'd ever forgotten, screaming my name in unison. And the theater burst into flame, but the fire was cold. Colder than the void I'd once drifted in, and as I burned, I laughed because it felt like waking up. And when I truly opened my eyes, I was standing in my backyard at midnight, soil caked under my fingernails, a shovel beside me, and a freshly dug grave at my feet, with no name on the marker. Just the phrase, "in case you come back," and when I turned to go inside, I saw myself watching from the upstairs window, smiling like it was proud, like I'd finally earned my place in the nightmare. And the house opened its door without me touching it. I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back. The 12th night greeted me not with dreams but with whispers. A constant hiss of overlapping voices bleeding through the walls, the ceiling, the air itself, all chanting different fragments of thoughts I never remembered thinking. Some from childhood, others from dreams I hadn't yet had. And as I lay in bed, staring into the dark, that no longer felt empty, the noise began to align, turning chaotic static into rhythmic invitation. A song made of longing and dread, coaxing me downward not into sleep, but into surrender, and I must have given in, because suddenly, I was underwater without being wet. Floating through a black current filled with flickering memories shaped like fish, each one brushing past with a sting of recognition, and I swam through corridors made of bone, illuminated by the pulse of something vast and breathing behind the walls. Until I found a staircase, spiraling forever downward, carved from molars and finger bones, and I descended, barefoot, leaving a trail of red that never dried. And when I reached the bottom, I was back in the classroom from my youth. Only the desks were filled with children wearing my face, blank-eyed, mouths stitched shut with wire. And at the blackboard stood the nightmare in a teacher's coat, writing equations in blood. Fear plus memory equals permanence, pain divided by denial equals truth. And when it turned to me, it held up a report card made of skin with the words, "You never left," branded across it. And the walls peeled back like flesh to reveal an operating theater where surgeons with faces made of dream stuff carved open a version of me strapped to a table, pulling out long scrolls of black thread and unraveling them into symbols too old to read but too familiar to ignore. And as I backed away, I stumbled through a doorway that opened into a version of my home rebuilt from sound. Every object vibrating with whispers of old arguments, lost moments, and half-spoken apologies. And the floor was a heartbeat. And the walls were lungs. And the ceiling wept dreams like condensation. And in the center stood a mirror made of mercury, rippling with every lie I'd ever told myself. And when I touched it, I fell inward again, this time through a tunnel made of my own eyes, each one blinking and weeping and showing visions of what could have been lives I never lived, people I never became, endings I never chose. And I landed in a cathedral with no roof, only stars screaming overhead, and rows of pews filled with versions of me at every age, praying to something faceless standing at the altar. Something wearing a crown made of my bones, holding a book bound in the skin of my regrets, and when it spoke, it said, "This is the price of awakening," and pointed behind me, where a massive door stood, carved from all the bedroom doors I had ever closed behind me, and I opened it to find a staircase leading up. But every step I took turned to teeth beneath me, biting into my feet, drawing dreams instead of blood, and when I finally reached the top, I found myself back in my room. Only it was the version of my room that belonged to the nightmare now. With all the furniture slightly wrong, all the photos blinking, and my bed occupied by something that resembled me but was twitching in its sleep, whispering my name backwards, and I reached out to wake it, only for its eyes to snap open, completely black, and it sat up, grabbed my wrist, and whispered, "Only one of us can be real," and suddenly we were both pulled into a void of spinning memories, fighting not with fists but with fears, stabbing each other with moments of doubt, betrayal, self-loathing, until one of us bled out entirely. And I woke up gasping, but this time I was chained to my own bed, mouth sewn shut with threads of dreamlight. And standing over me was the thing I had fought, smiling with my mother's voice, whispering, "She'll go back to sleep. It's safer there." As it pulled the blanket over my head, and the ceiling began to open like an eye, I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back. The 13th night didn't start with sleep, began the moment I blinked. As if the act of closing my eyes for even a second was enough to snap reality in half. And when they opened again, I was no longer in my room, but suspended in an endless hallway that stretched in every direction, lined with infinite doors, each one breathing slightly, some weeping, some twitching as if dreaming, and carved above every doorframe were sentences I didn't want to read, phrases like "the moment you forgot," "the lie that kept you sane," "where you left her screaming." And I knew that behind every door was a memory I had buried, a piece of me I'd locked away for my own protection, and yet something was pushing me forward, forcing me to choose, and my hand moved on its own to open a door that whispered as it opened, revealing a kitchen soaked in twilight, where my younger self stood alone, barefoot and crying, staring into a refrigerator filled with nothing but shadows. And as I stepped inside, the floor shifted beneath me, and I fell backward through time, or inward through mind. I couldn't tell until I landed in the middle of a birthday party where no one had faces and every present was a box of teeth, and everyone clapped when I screamed, and I ran through the smoke of candles that burned cold, through a living room that had no windows, through a hallway that stretched into a forest, and the forest breathed, inhaling the moon and exhaling whispers that curled around my legs like chains, and the trees had eyes and the ground pulsed like a heart, and from above, the stars began to fall slowly at first, then faster, until the sky was raining fire that sang my secrets as it burned. And then I heard the laughter, my own voice twisted and layered into something deeper, older, echoing through the forest and shaking the trees until they bled light, and the ground cracked beneath me, revealing a staircase spiraling down into a mouth. And I descended without choice, each step marked by another name I'd tried to forget, people I hurt, people I left, people who begged me not to go. And at the bottom was a carousel spinning in the dark, its horses replaced by versions of me frozen in moments of weakness, me crying at the foot of a hospital bed, me locking a door while something begged from the other side, me staring into a mirror with blood on my hands, and the carousel kept spinning until I stepped onto it, and then it stopped, and the world flipped inside out, and I was in a hospital room with flickering lights, my arms restrained, monitors flatlining. And standing over me was the nightmare wearing a nurse's uniform. Its mouth split open to wide, revealing rows of eyes instead of teeth, and it whispered, "You keep waking up in the wrong world," before plunging a syringe into my chest, filled with liquid memory. And suddenly I remembered everything, the original dream, the escape, the lie I told myself to cope. The moment I looked into the well and saw, not a reflection, but a future. And the truth that I had never left, had only climbed into a better cage, and now that cage was cracking. and the walls around me bled dreams, and my hospital bed floated upward into the mouth of a god I had dreamed as a child but abandoned when I grew up, and that god was angry, and as it swallowed me, I passed through 1,000 lifetimes where I was hunted, haunted, reborn, and broken, and in every one, the nightmare followed. Not as a monster but as a choice: stay asleep and be safe, or wake up and be alone, and I screamed that I wanted neither. And the god laughed until it choked on me and spit me back into my bed, now surrounded by mirrors all showing different versions of me, some begging for help, some laughing, some dead. And they all said in unison, "You can't kill what you created to survive." And then the mirrors shattered and I sat up, gasping, only to see that my room had shifted again. Everything reversed, colors wrong, gravity sideways, and the only thing still was the thing in the corner, wearing my skin like a hoodie, smiling softly, rocking back and forth, whispering, "2 nights left, then we trade." I escaped my nightmare, but it followed me back. The 14th night came not as rest but as reckoning. And as soon as my head touched the pillow, the world folded in on itself like a collapsing lung. And I dropped not into a dream, but into a judgment. A courtroom where the walls were made of my past and the ceiling dripped seconds from all the time I'd wasted pretending I was fine. And seated in the judge's chair was a towering, faceless figure composed entirely of voices familiar, cruel, indifferent, disappointed, and, before it stood a version of me trembling, restrained, forced to relive every horror not as victim, but as culprit, each memory twisted to cast me as the architect of my own suffering. And the jury was made of the people I had let down, turned monstrous by the lens of regret, their fingers pointing, their mouths sewn shut but screaming through their stitched lips. And as the sentence was passed down, guilt in all degrees, forever without forgetting, the floor fell open beneath me and I dropped into a dreamscape where the laws of time, physics, and reason shattered like glass, revealing a shifting labyrinth of rooms that bled into each other. A hallway where every picture on the wall showed me dying in a different way. A bathroom mirror that replaced my reflection with those I'd lost, a dining room table set for one with an empty chair that sobbed when I looked at it too long. And every doorway led back to the same room, my childhood bedroom. But every time I entered it, something else had changed. Sometimes the walls were pulsing with veins. Sometimes the toys were whispering my name. Sometimes the bed was already occupied by the dream version of me, eyes wide open, repeating the words "not yet, not yet, not yet." And eventually I understood that the house was not a place but a cycle. A trap of my own making, a recursive nightmare feeding on my refusal to let go, and when I tried to scream, I found my mouth gone, replaced by an echo chamber of every bad decision I ever made, and from the walls came the slow clap of the nightmare. Itself no longer just a creature but now a force, an atmosphere. A gravity that pulled me downward as if the very floor wanted to consume me. And it appeared not from a shadow but from inside me, crawling out of my own mouth as a perfect replica of my fear. And it spoke not in language but in sensations. The nausea of guilt, the pressure of shame, the chill of being forgotten, and it led me by the hand, through a series of impossible scenarios, reliving goodbyes I never got to say. Funerals that hadn't happened yet. Betrayals I feared might still come, and every one ended the same way. With me trapped behind glass, pounding to be let out while the world moved on without me. And finally, I was dragged into a place beyond dream or nightmare. A void filled with staircases that led into each other. Gravity flipping at random. Doors opening onto sky. Oceans flowing up walls. And at the center was a door labeled "One More Night." And as I stepped through it, I found myself not in another horror but in a quiet, sterile room with white walls, a single bed, and a man sitting beside it, who looked just like me, but older. Eyes sunken with years of running, and he said, "We all think we're escaping, but there's no outside of it, only deeper layers." And when I asked what this place was, he just handed me a mirror, and when I looked into it, I saw myself asleep in my own bed, the nightmare sitting calmly at the foot of it, smiling, waiting, counting down, and the man said, "Tomorrow, one of you wakes up. You better hope it's the right one." And then the mirror cracked, the lights went out, and I opened my eyes in my bed to find my room cold, silent, untouched, but something had moved. I knew it, something had changed, and from the corner came the faint sound of breathing that wasn't mine, growing slower, heavier. Almost like it was pretending to sleep just long enough to fool me. I escaped my nightmare. But it followed me back. The 15th night began with stillness so thick it felt staged. Like the silence in a theater right before the curtains are pulled back to reveal something no one paid to see. And though my eyes were open, I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't even twitch a finger, as if my body had already been claimed by something older than sleep. And from the ceiling above me came a slow peal, like fabric tearing open, revealing not the rafters or roof but a yawning darkness speckled with drifting fragments of all the dreams I'd ever forgotten, fragments that shimmered like broken thoughts, looping with the same whispered question, "Which one of us will stay?" And I was lifted, not by force but by invitation, my body unraveling thread by thread until I passed through the ceiling into a space between realities. A liminal void filled with echoes of things that might have been, and ahead of me stood a long hallway paved with my memories, burning slowly behind panes of obsidian glass, and at the end of it, waiting patiently, was the nightmare, not monstrous, not grotesque anymore, but wearing my face perfectly now. My expression, my voice, only slightly off, like a reflection that blinked too slowly. And it gestured for me to sit across from it, at a small round table set between void and fire. And when I did, it slid a contract toward me written in my handwriting, signed in my blood. Dated on the night I first tried to forget. It said simply, "You may wake, but I too will wake with you." And I realized, now, that all of it, the maze, the horror, the distortions, was not punishment, but preparation, softening my boundaries, so that when the final trade came, there would be nothing left to resist. And the nightmare smiled gently and said, "There is no escape, only transfer." And I remembered every night it had warned me, every whisper I'd ignored. And now it offered me the one thing I could no longer trust. Freedom, but at the cost of returning different, fractured, haunted. And so I said nothing, only nodded, and the moment I did, the nightmare leaned forward and whispered in my ear, "Taguret," before crawling back into the cracks of my soul, like smoke through a vent. And I fell down, down, back into my body, back into the world, eyes flying open in a morning that looked right but felt wrong. Light pouring through the window but casting shadows that twitched when I didn't. And as I sat up, I felt the difference immediately. My breath fogged the mirror. Did it feel too real? Or not real enough? Did something follow you too? If you're still awake, you're not alone. This was part 1 of I Escaped My Nightmare. But it followed me back, only on EchoVerse Whispers. If the darkness felt close tonight, wait until you hear what's next. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a whisper in the comments, and share this with someone who never sleeps quite right. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your door closed.